Welcome back to a friend of the show, Stuart Patrick, Head of the Chamber of Commerce in Glasgow. Stuart, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Willie. I would normally want to kick off the new year with a healthy list of positive news, but I have to acknowledge that just 4 weeks in, decisions have not been going Glasgow's way. We were bitterly disappointed that the Clyde Green Freeport proposal lost out to bids from the Cromarty, Firth and from Edinburgh. Given that we believe that the Clyde Freeport proposal would have generated upwards of 30,000 jobs and attracted £2 billion worth of private business investment, you can imagine that we are vigorously supporting the city's call to UK and Scottish Government ministers for urgent discussions on the way forward for national government backing to Glasgow City region. There are some issues to resolve. What does the UK government's levelling up strategy amount to if the region with by far the largest concentrations of poverty and disadvantage loses out to one of the UK's richest? It took Glasgow some 3 decades to stop the drift in population and investment from the west coast to the east. That we now have 2 freeports on the east coast and nothing on the west north of Liverpool can only make it more difficult to achieve our goals for inclusive growth. Nor can the Scottish Government be let off the hook. Just over 3 years ago, the Government made a bold commitment to revitalise the River Clyde with the launch of the Clyde Mission Plan. So far, that has amounted to one further announcement of £10 million towards a package of relatively small projects. Well, then Tom will remember over 20 years ago a broadly similar announcement for a £2 billion worth of projects called the Clyde Waterfront. That made clear just how much investment was needed to get the Clyde moving again. Nobody would argue that the task is anywhere near finished. With Clyde Mission stalled and the Freeport rejected, what is the plan now? Then the UK government announced that Glasgow was not successful in the second round of Levelling Up Fund bids. What was much more concerning was discovering that the time and energy spent by the City Council submitting plans for 7 projects, including the People's Palace refurbishment and the proposal to cap the M8 at Charing Cross, was a waste of valuable time. It turned out that areas which had secured a project in the first round, as Glasgow did with the Pollux Stables project, were ruled out for the second, without making that clear. Both the UK and Scottish governments must look again at their commitment to the long-term transformation of Glasgow City region. Of course, there has been great progress over the past 20 years, but there are too many of the region's towns and communities that have still to see the benefits of that success. Yes, there has been a city deal, now 8 years old, and replicated in regions all across Scotland. But Manchester and Birmingham are on to their 3rd and 4th rounds of fresh resources and devolved powers. Glasgow is much further behind. It's not all bad news. Glasgow's designation by the UK government as an innovation accelerator means there's £33 million coming to funding towards projects that will help local companies invest in new technologies. We already know that Glasgow is one of the world's biggest centres for space communications and satellites. Now there's a pipeline of projects from Glasgow and Strathclyde universities to work with local businesses on new technology, including photonics, advanced manufacturing, quantum computing, fintech, digital communications and precision medicine. An announcement on which projects have secured a share of that money is due very soon. And I can also confirm from the Chamber's own work on international trade documentation that whisky exporting has been strong in recent months. So it is with a heavy heart that we find ourselves starting yet another Scottish Government consultation that looks set to damage one of our most successful industries. The negative member feedback we are getting on the Government's proposals for banning alcohol advertising leaves one wondering just how much we value an exporting industry that also includes gin and craft beers. I can't remember a Scottish trade mission or an inward investment conference which has not used a whisky tasting or a distillery visit as part of the pitch. Now we're wondering whether all those distillery visitor centres have a prosperous future. Now we're discussing whether some whisky brands might be traded energetically overseas but withdrawn in their home base in Scotland. Is the Scottish Government really proposing that we promote whisky overseas whilst hiding it away in disgrace at home? What message do we think that sends to our markets abroad? Economic times are hard enough without the government constantly dreaming up new obstacles for our most successful industries to negotiate.
Wow, Stuart.
My goodness, Stuart. Have a wee dram, son.
Make it a double.
I think we all need a double after that.
But
wow.
Stuart, we have to be honest here, right? And the listeners have to know that the Scottish Government worked against Glasgow in this decision. There is no doubt they made it quite clear in the response to the letter from Susan Aiken that the Scottish Government were part of the decision-making. So for the free port to end up in Edinburgh, we're not going to argue about Cromarty, right? But for the free port between Glasgow and Edinburgh, for that to end up in Edinburgh, right, was all based on what the Scottish Government had to say. There's no doubt about that. Right. And we mentioned last week as well, we mentioned that we're given examples and we may talk about housing and about rent freezes and what have you. This is another example of when government tries to intervene when they think it's the right thing to do for business and the economy. And this is a big, big mistake.
One of the challenges, the very specific challenges that comes out of the decision is that we know that Glasgow Airport for a long time has been concerned about the fact that the government owns Prestwick Airport and has for several years had to invest in Prestwick Airport in order to try and help it survive. And that has to a degree cleared the pitch for Glasgow Airport in the competition for airlines. But now we've got Edinburgh Airport in the Freeport bid for the fourth. We'll also be getting some forms of state support in developing around the airport, and that will help them in attracting some of the goods exporting business that Glasgow is already doing. So in essence, we end up with a situation where of the three airports in the Central Belt, only one of them gets no state support, and that's Glasgow.
So what we should be talking about, Stuart, here is, when do we start talking about levelling up in Scotland?
Which is a very fair point, because the UK government in particular thinks about levelling up as a north-south affair. Actually, in Scotland, it's an east-west affair, and that's something we are not seeing in the discussions.
The facts are there. Look what's happened to the airlines. Look what's happened to the people who've moved from Glasgow to Edinburgh.
Yep.
And to be honest with you, Edinburgh now is so busy, right, with traffic, with the infrastructure, can't handle it. This is the last thing it needs, right? It's going to take you now about 2.5 hours to get to Edinburgh, right, if this continues. And I think that the government, really, it's interesting in a week, I don't know if you noticed it, but they kind of sneaked it out this week, that Louise MacDonald is now no longer in position. She's moved. All of these things at the moment, when the government get involved in business, we seem to be rushing to make the wrong ideas, and they all end up as negatives. And I have to say, to finish, where I do have a bit of sympathy with the UK government is, see when we give you £5 million under levelling up, and the best scheme you can come up with is to do up the old stables in Pollock Park. I don't think I'm rushing to give you much more money of all the things we could have spent the money on.
I might just defend one aspect of the city's submission.
Please.
That is that the criteria, and again, this is one of the debates about how you do levelling up, the criteria for the submissions for levelling up at the time were so restrictive. Yes. You had to have a project in a particular, in every constituency.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and of course in Glasgow, the central constituency is where most of the really good projects are. So you end up with a kind of strange mix of projects being submitted. Yeah. It's the UK government that then selects which one that they absolutely go for. Yeah. And that's where I think that UK and Scottish governments, they need to be going in that direction, more devolving of resources and powers to cities.
I mean, I think, I don't want to get into the politics of this, but I think when government decide that they know best, I'm very, very worried.
Yes. Yeah. Business did not have a major say in any of the thinking. And I think that we were all infused about the 10-year, the Nest plan, what they were going to do. And look what's happened. We have an interim leader, then not, and then someone. And it's interesting when you read, right, the letter of explanation from the Scottish government. You don't know who got the job, who didn't get the job. They're congratulating the person who did get the job, who didn't get the job. It's a bit of a dog's dinner. But I think this is a really good point. What you have enforced today with us is we've been talking for many, many weeks that we in the West, I'm not saying we're declaring UDI, but we have to get together. So bodies like yourself, talking to Scottish Enterprise, talking to SNP, we have to fight. We have to fight for the right to party, right, in the west of Scotland. And I think that what we're trying to do on the show here is bring organisations together so we can all have one voice, if we agree, right, and have one voice so that we can lobby, because certainly at the moment, it doesn't look as if we're getting a fair crack of the whip in the west.
Coming next.